Making new friends, it's one of the hardest things to do as an adult. Building a connection, keeping it going, it's a lot of work, even when you have a lot of interests in common. But for creators who are looking to collaborate on new ideas, it can be 10x even more difficult. But today's guest is here to help you solve that problem. Today I'm chatting with Gordon Saft, founder and CEO of Artnership. His mission? To enable individuals around the world who are creating media to work better together and to create possibilities for more collaboration. Gordon and I chatted about the upcoming launch of Artnership's app, on his experiences at both Google and Meta, working with creators in news, podcasts, the Metaverse, lots of places, and about the challenges of building a two-sided marketplace from scratch. He offers a compelling perspective that, despite how difficult it is to forge real connections online, technology is still an important tool for building and networking between creators and can lead to awesome creative and business opportunities. This is Gordon Saft. Welcome to Building Value. I'm Jason Nellis, and I'm obsessed with the intersection of creativity and technology. I started my career at Hulu, built products from the ground up at Facebook, and founded a few companies in between. Each episode, I talk to folks at the same intersection, whose career paths have had unexpected twists and turns. We talk about what gets them up in the morning, what keeps them up at night, and what helps them grow. If you like what you hear and you want to get more, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you consume fine podcast products. And here we are today with Gordon Saft. Gordon, thanks for joining us, man. How are you?
Hey, Jason, I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
You know, feeling good. Okay, I got a bit of a headache, but to be fair, I need to drink more water. The 4 cups of coffee I've had so far have probably contributed to that at least a little bit.
Wow. Did you sleep?
I did, but I need new pillows, I think. I think that's part of the contribution to the neck pain that I'm currently experiencing. This is not at all
You're looking
what
for
I normally...
something sponsored there?
Yeah, well, the problem is this leads to an inevitable question of should I call the My Pillow guy? And I want to avoid that. I don't feel like he's good for my brand.
I think there are a lot of pillow companies that would be proud to sponsor you.
I think you're very kind. Well, let's jump in. First things first. One of the things I love to ask folks when they join, tell me a little bit about yourself. Help us understand sort of the general arc of your career that got you here to Artnership and its soon to be groundbreaking launch here in the U.S.
Yeah, it'll break something. I have sort of an unusual, I think, career path to getting to this sort of entrepreneurial moment that I'm in right now. I actually started my career as a screenwriter and working as a production assistant on various TV shows here in New York City, where I grew up. This was a long time ago, sort of just at that moment where YouTube was getting ready to launch and online video was becoming a thing. It's a very long time ago for probably many of your viewers / listeners. But I started, getting fascinated by the way that people who were telling their stories were going to be doing it in new ways and putting that online and distributing in ways that had never really happened before. So I, did what any, maybe not what anyone would do in that situation. And that is I decided I would leave my sort of creative life for the moment and go figure out if I could finagle my way into a job in investment banking. It's the natural progression from spending all day writing and like working all night on film sets to working in PowerPoint and Excel. So I did that for a couple of years, and I worked with media companies, mostly magazines and online publishers. And basically that sort of train wrecked right into the financial crisis. And at that point, I went back to school and I got an MBA. And then I did that for a few years and went out and worked at Viacom, worked at MTV Networks in the Jersey Shore era, like the pinnacle of MTV Networks. And then I spent a few years working in different media companies and media startups, really across the gamut of, different media types. I worked in TV for a while. I worked in different forms of entertainment. And then I worked in publishing for a while and ended up, about 8 years ago, working for a startup called The Atavist, which was an online publishing platform for mostly small news organizations and individual creators, journalists, podcasters. And that was, for me, like really where talking to people who are making their living creating online sort of really started to grow and capture me. We were trying to build this thing that really enabled people who were working independently to tell their stories, to share their stories, to do it in ways that hadn't really been able to do before without sort of some massive CMS or, hiring graphic designer, and doing things that really people hadn't been doing before, and telling sort of new kinds of stories. I worked there for a few years leading the business team, and then left in 2016 and went to work at Google, working with news organizations and journalists and podcasters and creators, I think kind of before people were calling them creators. And I spent a long time working at Google on that stuff. And then a few years ago, went to work at Facebook, now Meta, working with, again, media companies, entertainment companies, and creators on the Metaverse initiatives and AR and VR products. And throughout all these experiences, I've always been really interested and passionate about going back to those like early YouTube days. How are people on their own telling their stories and sharing things, and becoming storytellers, growing as storytellers, really trying to put things online and share their stories in new ways. So over the course of the last couple of years, as this interest and this passion for sort of individual storytellers and creators was growing, a couple of things really started to jump out to me, and both excited me and really terrified me. The thing that excited me was that people were doing all of these things in new ways. It wasn't just YouTube anymore. It was podcasts. It was TikTok. It was newsletters through Substack. It was still like blogging a little bit. And all of these new forms that were coming, and the ways that people were telling their stories, was just expanding. And at the same time, having spent so much time at Google and Facebook, I was increasingly worried about sort of the fates of people who were telling these stories on their own online in different ways, because there is an imbalance there, and it can be tough to be an individual creator when you are relying on a platform. So I sort of started thinking about this problem, and I noticed that one thing that had, in conversations with creators and individual creative people, really started to stand out was the way that collaboration between creators was evolving in different ways. And what seemed like an interesting opportunity was, how can we better enable this connection from creator to creator to grow and evolve into something new? The history of sort of the collab goes, almost as long as YouTube. But the ways these were happening were growing and expanding and evolving. And it wasn't just about making something together. It was collaboration could be sustaining to someone who was creating, emotionally, commercially, creatively. There were all these ways that collaboration was doing new things and enabling people to work online. So what we are in the process of getting ready to launch into the App Store is an app that ostensibly connects people who are creating similar things, so we can just start this conversation of, how can we be working together? How can we be building something? Or how can we just be supporting each other? Because the work of creating alone can be so isolating and so lonely. And what if we just were able to support each other and share knowledge and work across boundaries? So Artnership is getting ready to launch in the coming days, and we're just trying to test out and see if there really is the appetite for that new way of sort of coming together. That was a long journey.
That, but all good journeys are long, right? There's a reason they're called Odysseys. It's not because the Odyssey was a weekend. There's a couple of things there that I want to touch on. And let me just also pull back and say, while you and I never overlapped at our time at Meta, because it's such a vast company and there were way too many people there to know everybody, I have always been fascinated with the kind of work that you were doing in the metaverse side of things. Because while I have, perhaps differing opinions than, say, our former CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, about the value of the metaverse in its current state, I do recognize that that's going to be sort of the next frontier for a lot of these new innovations around creative expression. But one thing that brings up that I'd love to hear your thoughts on, particularly around your work at Atavist and then later at Google, is that tension between creator and platform, which we all know is going to always exist and isn't new to the internet age. This was the same thing that you've seen all the way back to the days of the Gutenberg press, and the ability to control the distribution of content is certainly a part of the process of the creation of that same content. Um, Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that tension and where you see how platforms can support creators while at the same time sustaining themselves and even growing. Is that something that is a consistent line of thinking for this upcoming launch?
Yeah, to be honest, I think it's always going to be really complicated. And I think we have to sort of be optimistic, but a little bit skeptical. Um, Optimistic because obviously YouTube and everything else has um, enabled so much creativity over the course of the last 15 years, 18 years, whatever it is. All the platforms have, everything that has been unleashed as a result of the platforms is an incredible revelation for creativity and innovation and the expansion of ideas. At the same time, I think when you spend time at these places, and you spend a lot of time at these places, and I think especially when you see a couple of these places from the inside, I think you have to be somewhat clear-headed about the reality of them as businesses and sort of like what the eventual path in many cases will be. And I think priorities change and resources change and attention shifts. And, I think any of us who've worked at these places for any amount of time see how these kind of small pivots happen over time. And what is at one moment, a shift in resourcing towards one product due to some decision somewhere turns into, an extinction event for, to be a bit dramatic, for some type of person who is using the platform for their ideas and for the expansion of their business or ideas. So I would say, I don't think any platform is going anywhere. And I think in many cases, they're enormously supportive of the people on them. But I think a few key factors everyone who's making their living putting their work onto a platform should be aware of. The first is, in any sort of algorithmic distribution platform, it's called a power law for a reason. It's a law. The attention of the user will eventually tend towards the head of that distribution. The big get bigger. It's always going to happen. And so for those of us who have created things or are creating things or are telling stories and are, in the middle of that sort of torso to tail of the distribution, inevitably it means it's probably going to get harder over time because more and more people will be moving their attention to the top because the distribution is recommending those things at the top. That increasingly gets complicated, and that's something we're really focused on as we launch the product, because our hope is that by bringing people together, they get a little bit bigger, they get a little bit more scale, that cross promotion, cross pollination, expanded creativity, all these things can help them move a little bit further up into the sort of head of that curve. So that's the first thing I think we should all be aware of if we're creating something. The second is what I sort of started out with, which is, famously there's, this pivot to video that Facebook did a number of years ago, and all these news organizations, started making video, and it turned out that it had pretty detrimental effects to a lot of, especially mid-sized and smaller news organizations that were investing heavily in video, and it turned out that video really wasn't going to be a long-term priority. That's just one example, and it's by no means the only one. I think every one of these platforms has had a moment where they've just sort of picked up and decided this other thing is now our focal point. And with that change in attention comes, changes in resources, in people, in all of the things that currently someone who's creating professionally is supported by, whether that's a creator fund in one place or having a dedicated partner manager on a different platform. These things are all liable to move without much notice, and that's part of doing business. And then the third thing, which is I think very new in this terrain, but is worth paying attention to, is, and I don't know at what point you had talking about this on your bingo card, but I think generative AI is going to really complicate the relationship also.
Amazing.
And
That's my center square. Perfect.
I
Okay,
got
great.
you for the rest of the game.
All right.
And I think that obviously it's a very complicated situation. Obviously it's very new. Obviously it's evolving. But part of my fears in starting to work on some of this stuff has been for the last year that creating this much stuff this easily can have an incredible benefit, obviously, but to sort of flood the networks with easily created, easily churned out, not necessarily tremendously creative content could also have a really negative effect and exacerbate those two other problems that I mentioned before. More attention will move over to AI stuff. Uh, More stuff being distributed will further complicate that long tail distribution problem. And so it really just throws in this kind of crazy new variable into the world of creation and distribution of content that we obviously are not fully aware of or prepared for.
I couldn't agree with you more, and particularly to that point. Today is a somewhat auspicious day on the day that we're recording because OpenAI announced, I think, an hour ago that they have a new model called Sora, which creates minute-long videos from a text prompt. Right, and these
Are
are
you
not
breaking news
low-quality,
on the
low-grade videos.
podcast?
These are full 1080p. I am, and this podcast, the delta between this launch and when the podcast actually releases, it won't change anything. But what's interesting is these are not low quality videos. I mean, I'm watching Greg Brockman, who's the president at OpenAI, has this video, and it's not a low quality video. It looks like, except for some kind of obvious markers when you zoom in on the lead figure's face, this could easily be a cinematic shot from somebody's ad in downtown Tokyo, which is bizarre and also exciting, and I think speaks to all the tensions you just mentioned. When you think about solving these challenges, or maybe not solving, but addressing these challenges, how does Artnership respond to that, right? So the idea behind the platform, and correct me if I'm wrong, I want to paraphrase the conversations you and I have had, is Artnership is meant to be a platform through which creators can connect to one another and find opportunities for collaboration and build longer term artistic creative endeavors together. How do they do that? And do you think that is the way to counterbalance some of these tensions around the generative AI movement that is kind of threatening a lot of the existing paradigms in creativity?
That's the hope, and we're sort of at this MVP moment for the product. So I would say our goal for right now is modest in comparison to where we want to go, and modest in comparison to sort of the the beast of AI that is sort of getting ready to stomp on everything. Um, your summary is totally accurate. The goal for the product is really to enable the collaboration from creator to creator, to enable people to find each other, to have conversations easily, to spark that sort of creative spark that can be so magical when people are working on something for the first time. And we think of that sort of in three different ways. The first is truly creatively, collaboratively, like, can we make things together? And I think I like to think of it as really harkening back to those earlier days of YouTube, especially where there was this magic in making something with someone else. And how can we facilitate that? There is no way to necessarily find another creator on YouTube other than sort of, some elaborate, social stalking kind of procedure. So how can we find each other to start making something? The second is, is there a sort of an inspiration brainstorming conversation that people can have? How can we, remove some of that creative isolation that people have right now in making stuff and start some of those creative conversations, even if they aren't yielding a direct, product benefit of, oh, we're going to make this thing. And then the third is really a supportive one. How can we facilitate a creator to creator relationship that is geared around the fact that people who are creating stuff independently and on their own, no matter the platform, understand that this life of doing that, whether you're doing it full-time or part-time or professionally or semi-professionally, can be extremely isolating. And we've seen various ways where that's had a real detrimental effect on people's lives. So the idea is really, how can we enable those conversations on a spectrum from let's have a casual conversation and talk about what we're making, support each other through our problems, all the way to, can we build a longer term collaborative relationship? Can we have a creative partnership where we make a lot of stuff or cross promote our stuff or cross pollinate our ideas into each other's content? And then over the long run, what does a longer term relationship look like? What does sort of a media company built by its creators and owned by its creators actually look like? And then for me and for our team, what are the tools that would enable all of those things on that spectrum to be brought into fruition? So right now, what we're getting ready to launch is sort of just the first couple minutes of that. It's just let's see if we can spark those relationships, whatever the purpose is. And we know those conversations are happening, but they're happening in really weird ways. They're happening on mostly Instagram DMs, where you can find someone and maybe get lost in DMs, maybe not really want to respond to someone. It's very high school dancey, I think, in there. So how can we find each other and start to have those creative and generative and relationships filled with possibility?
When you say high school dance, do you mean like when I would try to ask somebody out for a high school dance where my voice would crack and I'd be doing like nervous Simpsons voices in an attempt to impress somebody? Because if so, yes, 100% correct.
I do mean it like that, but
Okay, good.
what I have, there's this interesting dynamic, which, I think if you've reached out to someone to collaborate with them, and I have talked to creators who go through this regularly and have seen it happen, is there's this sort of strange social conventions that exist in this way, where you look at your follower count and you look at that person's follower count and you say, I could never reach out to that person. She has 2 times the followers I do. Like, it just doesn't happen. And she would look at your request to DM or the DM that's incoming and say, I can't, like, there's nothing for me in this thing. So we have this strange these strange mores that have emerged around collaboration that is completely the opposite of the way that it sort of started off, where it was this sort of fun and spontaneous and magical thing where we were going to make stuff together. And it has gone so far in the other direction that the big question for us is really, can we pull it back a little bit and capture some of that, what it used to be?
I really resonate with that. And in particular, the idea of the collaboration shifting from an artistic or creative endeavor into a business transaction, which is really what it's boiled down to, right? If I'm looking at your social count versus my social count, and I'm determining that your social count doesn't meet what I need, or you're too far above me, and it's like asking a celebrity on the street for their signature, then it becomes a much more complicated and much harder ask. I empathize with that, and particularly for a lot of smaller creators I know who've made those asks and felt rejection, and it hits them personally. I'd love to dig in a little bit. We talked before about your launch and how it's upcoming. Hopefully, by the time this podcast is available, it's actually launched. Tell me some of the growing pains. I'd really love to dig into going from concept to launch and the vision you have for this versus the reality of building, and where you've overcome some of those challenges, or maybe you're still stuck on them.
Yeah, it's a good question. And you're catching me still in a very vulnerable place about it, because
well, I'm here for you. Hold on.
You.
Now, this is a safe place.
Great.
I don't want you to feel attacked. Let's take a breath. No,
not
I'm
attacked.
Kidding.
No, I'm
Okay,
feeling
good.
I think what is exciting and scary and confusing about the whole process of doing this is that there's like no start line and no finish line. It just is this evolution of an idea into, the different stages of a thing. And, it is a constant molding job of the thing into something else. And I say that as someone who is building this, but is, does not come from a technical background. So I have spent, most of my career working with, talking to, collaborating with technical people, whether that was, building a, 12-person startup years ago, and leading the business side, but having to, sort of work on product strategy with the product and engineering team, all the way through working at Google and Facebook, which are environments, as you know, where product and engineering are very much leading the charge in many of the conversations that are happening. So really the evolution of the idea, evolved from talking to users, potential users, who in my case are people who are creating independently. And I use that term intentionally because I think we have been getting caught up in the associations that many people have with terms in this world. Some people really like to call themselves creators. Some people like to call themselves influencers. Some people don't want to be called influencers. Some people don't want to be called creators. Some people want to be called writers. Some people want to be called journalists. Journalists don't want to be called creators or influencers. And so, it has been our goal to enable these conversations and connections and collaborations across all of these boundaries. So you'll notice I tiptoe around the terms I use for who is using the product, because I am very interested and very passionate about trying to cross all of these boundaries for people, because I think it's going to be necessary for us to all be talking to each other. And I think when we use one with the group that doesn't want one, it shuts the conversation down because of the association they may or may not they have, which may or may not be true with whatever the other group is. So, slight tangent there.
But let me jump in to say an important one, because a friend of mine, Andrew Edwards, who runs Gear Live, which is a tech review site, he's the editor-in-chief. He's been all across every platform that has ever existed for social media. And whenever anybody refers to him as a YouTuber, I don't think takes offense is the right term, but if he's listening, maybe, Andrew, tell me what you think. He certainly doesn't like that, right?
Yeah.
And that can limit his ability to sort of interact with somebody if they insist on sort of, categorizing him in that space. Do you find, as you're developing the strategy for Artnership, that you're tending towards a particular term that is all encompassing, or do you just get very narrow and targeted around your copy and enabling connection more than sort of categorizing everybody in one space?
It's a really great question. And I myself have been getting really in the weeds on copy and the way I talk to people who are creating, because I don't want to, it's not that I don't want to limit limit the potential users, but I don't want to limit like who can actually benefit from what we've built, because I genuinely think like, look at the if we look at sort of back out and look at the realm of people who create online who have been negatively affected by a relationship with their platform or company over the course of the last year. It could be everything from people on YouTube, creators on YouTube who may call themselves creators or YouTubers or vloggers or whatever. It could be journalists who may have newsletters that have been laid off from a local news organization around the country. It could be podcasters or podcast producers who have probably seen some downturn in podcast production as exclusive deals have been backed off by Spotify and other platforms. It could be other kinds of sort of like knowledge creators who may have been very active on Twitter and may have been turned off by something that happened in that transition that led them someplace else. Could have been something at Substack that they didn't like and moved over to a different newsletter platform. So,
Gee, what
and
could be related to those two platforms? Those last two that you mentioned, I can't. Nothing's
couldn't
coming
tell
to
you.
mind. Yeah,
And on
yeah.
top of that, like even look at the SAG and WGA strikes that happened this year. All of them related in some form to the relationship between media and technology. And AI became a big piece of those Hollywood conversations when it came down to it. So I think at the moment we are so, and we meaning people who create things, uh, create media, are so sort of siloed based on the platform we create on, the type of content we make, whether it's video or audio or text, or design, or anything, uh, that we don't talk across those borders. We don't talk across those silos. It's really impossible to have sort of a consistent conversation. But in reality, there's no reason why we shouldn't be, because the problems of sort of like independent creation are really shared in many ways, no matter the media type that you're creating for. So that's really a genesis of the focus on the words we're using, because I think that anything else that is sort of getting into being a barrier between those groups is just continuing down this separation that I think has already been aggravated enough.
In thinking about all of that, how do you define a product roadmap that then actually allows you to build the platform? Because when we think about these things theoretically, when we think about the tension of relationships between platform and creators, creators to creators, the different types of creators that can exist in the world, the fact that the term creator itself is even a little bit loaded, there's a lot of, I don't want to say harrowing, but certainly tense navigation that one has to do around product features and how to enable all of that. So let's take a step back and tell me a little bit about how you've been building your product roadmap and what's the point of view you've been taking in terms of how to actually build something that functionally solves the problem you're addressing.
I think that when I went into it, I had a lot of ideas about different features that might benefit what I thought would be everyone, but in reality was pretty focused on one group or another. One group meaning, a video, someone on YouTube, or a newsletter writer, or whatever it might be. And I think when it came down to kind of brass tacks in, when we were getting ready to start development, it was really just sort of taking a very clear-eyed look at what was sort of the core experience that could be unifying for really as many of those groups of people as possible, and at the same time, sort of what could solve that, what I think is the like core connective problem across all of those groups of people. And it is sort of this siloing, but really this lack of connection and this inability to sort of find each other and work together, whether it's commercially or creatively. How can we enable those conversations to be happening? And I think when we started building really at the front of the product, when we started thinking about just onboarding people onto it, these things became really complicated questions, because as soon as you sort of ask people what they make, or where they put it out, or what it is, it raises all of these flags, because you can't say, oh, what do you do? If someone says I'm a YouTuber, it automatically sort of creates that barrier again. But if you sort of can think about these different questions of how people are, interacting with their ideas, putting them out into the world, and not necessarily identifying with a platform so clearly, it seems to sort of bring them closer together. If you are someone who makes videos about cooking, it's different than if you say you're a YouTuber who does food content, because inevitably you are led down a road where you are, I think, expecting to, build just around this idea of doing something on YouTube. Whereas I think if you can sort of pull out the genre or the type of topic that someone generally writes or creates about, all of the sort of like secondary questions around distribution and interests don't fall away, but they sort of can move a bit to the back away from what that like core thing that someone is passionate about and making something about. And at that point, it becomes a more natural way to connect with someone. And it also enables us to connect based on that as sort of like the core atomic unit. I make videos about food. Jason has a newsletter about restaurants. It's very good. What is that conversation we can be having? Because once it's about the thing we're doing on a day-to-day basis, what is that atomic unit of thing we care passionately about? I don't think it's about videos necessarily. I think it's about what are the stories we're telling. We may be telling them in different ways and on different platforms and with different media type. But I think fundamentally there are a lot of ways that we can establish those connections, and parsing the ability to do it has been really top of mind on thinking about the roadmap and making sure that we want to stay focused on certain types of people creating, and certainly that's been we don't want to bite off too much to keep the food metaphor going. But I think staying really focused on part of the North Star, which has been eliminating the barriers and not furthering them even deeper.
First of all, anytime you want to get together and do some collaboration on food, I'm in. I just want to throw it out there.
I think it's a great idea. That could be another podcast.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but I have family who are in the food and restaurant industries, and in fact, my stepmother is a fairly well-known food influencer and restaurant influencer in DC.
Is that true?
So, very much, yeah. She is Nikki Nellis. You can look her up. I'll send you the link. TheListAreYouWantIt.com. Free ad for family business. Yeah, I mean, just as an aside, that's one of my favorite things to talk about. So kudos to you for finding a subject that's near and dear to my heart. Yeah.
I use it as an example a lot because I think it has, I think it works in every medium. And so it serves, I think, as a helpful example for thinking about this idea that I think if you're focused on, one platform or one medium, you don't think about how easily stuff can translate into other places, which inherently limits the kind of collaboration or creativity that could come from working with someone else. But everyone, I think people obviously love food, but people obviously love consuming food content also. And I think no matter where it is being served. Oh, no. Yeah.
No, you did it. You did it. You brought it home. Don't be upset. That was perfect.
No.
I appreciate, first of all, I appreciate the ease of the food metaphor. I'm with you on that one. Or imagery, maybe is a better way to use it. I really also want to call out that there's a very clear through line that I'm hearing in all of your responses around being as considerate as possible for the greatest number of types of creators and the value that you can bring to the table. I do think, though, that I want to sort of press a little bit further on the idea of how to go from introducing creators on the platform into inciting action. Because the thing I would be most concerned about if I'm a potential investor who's thinking about Artnership is that's all great. And I believe in the theory that you're espousing, but I don't hear the next step of how do we go from putting two people together and then actually getting them to make the collaboration in whatever medium it's going to be in. So tell me a little bit about your thinking there. And again, this is a new product. It hasn't even necessarily launched yet, but I'd love to hear what your thesis is around how to incite people into that kind of creative action.
It's a great question. There are, in this version of things, it is intentionally and I don't think problematically, but maybe questionably open-ended.
Okay.
And
that's a reasonable answer. That's fine. I'm just curious what you're thinking.
No. But I think there's more to it. And it's open-ended because as I talk to a lot of different creators who collaborated with other creators, and I, got into some user research and was sort of digging into this more. The ways this happen currently are really varied in a number of ways. And, I think part of this, part of the MVP process of seeing what works is, I think we're sort of like taking it for a spin a bit. And the variety of ways that people have these conversations, we have a few things in the product currently as kind of thought starters to get the conversations going, but they're prompts more than anything. They're just sort of easing people into having conversations. We've I think we've been really interested in a question of what is sort of, if we put two people into this kind of environment that is sort of closed and trusted and creative, what may happen we're not expecting? And I think at this moment, what we're interested in, or at least I'm very interested in, is like, where might the magic be here that we haven't been able to see before because of one thing or another? And I think it may go against, um, some product thought leader, focus on testable hypotheses kind of thing. But I've been kind of interested in doing this a little bit differently and seeing where there may be new opportunities for people working together to find a little bit of magic and spark in an organic way, even with a couple sort of social cues that we can put into the product to help them going. There are a couple product features that, one in particular, that I think of as like the next thing in the hopper on the roadmap, which would be really geared towards, pushing people together in a more focused way, as in, think of it almost like an open collaboration board of, I make food content. I'm going to do this series of podcasts. I'm looking for a co-host, and sort of start the conversation very intentionally like that, as a different way of getting things moving. I was interested in not doing that yet, because in spite of the fact that I think it is incredibly useful and will get people who may be resistant to connecting to connect and reach out and start that process of conversation and collaboration, I sort of wanted to see what happened when it was open-ended and the opportunities were available and without limitation or constraint. And it may yield nothing, and it may be wrong, but I think that going in the other direction wouldn't have probably allowed us to learn as much as hopefully this way will.
I get it. I think too, what I like hearing in all of this is that you're not, I think a lot of product founders, as you talked about before, not only want to follow what are considered best practices for building a product roadmap, particularly at the beginning of a business, but they have very specific and intentional aesthetic about what creators should or should not be doing in a particular interaction. I really want to call out how the open-ended nature of what you're building could really be that solution, right? I really see the connection there, and I see the interesting opportunity that presents. Do you think that in the long term, right? Let's say that you launch and things are successful and the interactions start to really blossom and collaborations start to really grow from this. Is your long-term strategy to monetize those interactions, or to just provide the safest place possible for those to grow organically, and you'll think about sort of the business growth around that unmonetized center, perhaps?
The short answer is I'm not sure. I think the longer answer is, I think we have sort of a good history, and I say we, like the industry at large, I think have a good enough history to see that, an ad-supported sort of environment may not necessarily yield the results that we want it to. And we can see this obviously across media products and how subscriptions versus ads have affected the nature of those products or platforms.
Well, and not to mention, I think people are tired of ads.
Sure.
I think we've injected ads into everything at a certain point.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm thinking about what that long term looks like in a number of different ways. I think if we can through this version of things, or this version of things plus X, Y, and Z features on the roadmap? Is there a version of this that is worth a subscription, whether that's freemium or subscription just to use it? It's not that yet, but I think if we can create enough value and those connections are having real world benefits for the people using the product, then I think it's reasonable. But I think there's then a range of other things that could enable the commercial and creative relationships between people that could help sustain the business longer term. And I don't necessarily think those are ad products, but I think there are, there are various tools and services that could enable business relationships and the services that two people operating or multiple people operating as a media company or media business or whatever you want to call it would probably be worth paying for, either if it's by a third party or by the creators themselves as sort of the thing that enables an upgrade or something. So I think of it as sort of like, I spent a lot of time working with media companies, and I think of various sizes. And I think one of the lessons that now, if we're in this sort of strange moment with media and content companies in particular, that has really emerged is, diversification is probably the answer to a lot of the problems that media companies have walked into. And I don't consider necessarily this a pure media company, but I think of it as something that hopefully will enable sort of a new type of media company. And so I think of the potential business models and potential monetization for the product and the business itself in a similar way. What are the ways that we can bring real value to the greatest number of people for the thing that we're trying to do? And that may be many different things.
Awesome. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time, so I want to wrap with a question that I've been starting to ask more frequently, which is, nobody builds a business in a vacuum. The point of business, or the point of, I should say, I think the point of business is to build something bigger than oneself and to have something to leave behind in the long term if you're successful and if you do it right. When you think about Artnership, or maybe the arc of your career, is there a legacy you're looking to leave behind, or something, even if it's just sort of a feeling that you want people to have when they think about the course of your career?
It's a good question. I would
You've told me I've had so many good questions. I feel so good right now.
I was hoping you would take that and view me in a positive light, so that you wouldn't ask me anything hard.
I already view you in a positive light. You don't have to worry about that.
Thank you. I having sort of gotten to go down memory lane at the start of this, the thing that I now at this point in my career I'm kind of surprised by or fascinated by unintentionally is like the number of different stops that have occurred in my career, and zigs and zags, and it's been really interesting. My dad has always said this thing about, in the rearview mirror, life is a straight line. And as I've been working on this business and really been passionate about the ways that individuals are telling their stories, however they're doing it and whatever those stories are about, I reflect on sort of where I started in trying to unsuccessfully tell stories creatively myself, and took a lot of different stops trying to enable those stories, whether it was on, via entertainment or news or audio or whatever it might be. And so what I'm focused on and interested in and hope to do something about with this, really, that I hope lasts, is how can we enable the most people, whatever they're making, wherever they're making it, to tell those stories and live those creative lives in the way that they want, whether that's being able to educate or inform or entertain people, and live those lives sustainably. Fundamentally, I think we're at a really tricky time in media and storytelling across all of all of the genres and media types. And so the hope is, trying to connect people and bring them together and enable this kind of collaboration will do a thing that prevents them from having to, go do something else. How can we help people to sort of make their lives creatively and commercially in a way that they want to? And I'm hoping that we can, move that a little bit and enable that so it is sustaining for the most people possible.
Well, I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much for joining. If folks want to follow up, where's the best place for them to reach out to you or to follow the Artnership journey?
Yeah, well, I think when this comes online, we'll be in the App Store, so you can download the app. You can visit us at artnership.co, and you get everything there.
I love it. Well, thank you again for joining. Really appreciate hearing about your story and your journey and the launch of this next phase. I'm excited to see how, I guess, is it millions or billions you're hoping for? You know what? We'll talk about that later.
Trillions.
That's trillions. There we go. Perfect. Very cool. Well, thank you again. And we will have you back on, I hope soon, to hear about the successful launch and what comes next.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. All right.
Talk to you
Take care.
soon.